But first, our top story for this morning goes over to Washington as Congress sees a bipartisan bill hit the floor that, if passed, would make it eligible for truck drivers to receive overtime pay. Our Washington correspondent, John Gallagher, is here to tell us all about it. John, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks you guys for having me on. Yeah, so this is, like you said, it's a really short, it's like a one-page bill because all it says is this would exempt, put a line in the code saying that which would take away an exemption from the Fair Labor Standards Act, which right now that exemption allows employers to avoid having to pay their drivers overtime for work after 40 hours, after a 40-hour work week. So this would repeal that. And so as you know, as we know, drivers can work way over 40 hours. So potentially that could, for certain drivers, that could be a lot of money. So the same bill, it's a House and Senate, it's a bicameral, bipartisan bill, but it was introduced last year in the House and the Senate. So this was last year's Congress as well. So that bill had the Senate bill had 4 co-sponsors. The House bill had 11. So, but because but that one only had a year to kind of sit in and try to gain momentum before the new Congress came in, which wipes out all the bills. So this one's being introduced in the first year of this new Congress. So. Again, it has few co-sponsored, but it has more time to kind of sit and gain momentum. So I guess you could make that argument from that standpoint. It might have a better chance of actually, gaining momentum and going through. And so it's backed by OOIDA and truck safety groups. OOIDA likes it because it, obviously it increases driver pay, which they say is a big one of the factors of why we have so much turnover. So this could kind of bring down driver turnover. The safety groups like it because they contend that, when drivers aren't being paid enough, that in what they consider to be a fair wage, they have to hustle more for more loads. So that increases fatigue and that increases crashes. So that's why the safety groups are sort of behind that as well.
So, John, the interesting thing about this is, of course, drivers are paid by the mile right now, and we know that they operate on maximum hours of service instead of that kind of standard 40-hour work week that a lot of us are used to. Do we run the risk on, if this bill passes, obviously it's going to be a pretty hefty impact to the employers because it's going to come out of their paycheck and into the drivers' paychecks. Do we run the risk now of these employer groups, maybe the fleets, the carriers, now looking to employ more drivers that are driving less to keep them within that 40 hours instead of having to pay them overtime instead?
Yeah, well, it seems that they don't even. Yeah, that is true, Kaylee. But it seems like they don't even want to get to that point because they're pushing back on it, saying, as you said, it's going to don't support this because you drivers out there because it's just the employers are going to compensate for that by just not cutting down hours so that they don't have to pay overtime. In fact, that was, interestingly, I was listening in on the Women of Trucking Advisory Board that the FMCSA had set up. They were doing their last meeting yesterday, where they're coming up with recommendations to report to the FMCSA administrator, and the overtime pay exemption was. When the subcommittee brought their recommendations to the board that was listening, what everyone was listening yesterday, removing that exemption was at the top, was like second or third down on the list. And it did say one of their essential statements for this report to FMCSA was to remove the exemption. Well, the ATA representative on the board pushed back hard on that, and that there was a kind of a back and forth on why they want it, why the subcommittee wanted this for women drivers, saying it's an issue that affects everyone, but they were saying it particularly affects women drivers because a lot of times they're more financially strapped, because a lot of times there are single mothers with children, so they're particularly affected by this, was their point. But the ATA representative, who also lobbies Congress on labor issues, she kind of basically towed the ATA line that this is, like I said, this is going to you guys better not hope you get what you wish for, because the employers that would be involved in this are just going to cut down your hours. So they got that, basically that statement was pretty much watered down to say instead of remove it, it said recommend research and study the potential for removing removing this exemption might have on women driver pay. So and it got moved down from like third or fourth on the list of essential statements to the last statement. So I thought that was interesting to see how that specific thing worked, and just how boards work in general.
There's definitely a few different ways this could all play out. As Kaylee mentioned, more drivers being hired for less work, potentially shorter hours, and then also, of course, pay transparency has always been a big issue for a lot of folks, so that can start to get blurry once again. So, John, we're looking at this being pushed forward. Have we have any precedents of this happening before, or this argument being brought forward? And if so, what did that look like?
Yeah, it's sort of the same, pretty much the same arguments as when it was introduced last year, Anthony. So it's a heavy lift, as they say, because it's 90 years this thing has been on the books pretty much, and to get something like that altered in the labor code would be really tough. And as we know, again, it all comes down. We've got this divided Congress, and it's heavily supported by Democrats, but there's a lot of pushback, obviously, in the House on all things Democrat. So it's hard to see this going too far, but we'll see. You never know what the Senate might be able to. Maybe there's going to be, once they get past these spending bills and get Congress or get government up and running, if that does happen by the end of the week, we'll see that there might be some more consensus on stuff like this.
And so, John, of course, what are the next steps for this bill now? Are we talking committee and then debate and then vote? Or, again, you mentioned government shutdown could potentially happen at the end of this week again, so it could be a little while before we see that.
Yeah, that's right. It's just introduced, so it has to go through a committee. We're not going to see anything too quick on it. And as far as the Women in Trucking report, that report goes to the there was other stuff I forgot to mention, and obviously there was anti-harassment and a lot of other things that the Women in Trucking Board pushed forward for recommendations for getting more women drivers and advancing women drivers in trucking. That one goes to the FMCSA administrator, and then that has to be a final recommendation that the administrator then brings to Congress to be finalized for recommendations.
John, certainly a heavy lift, as you mentioned. Thank you so much for joining us this morning and shedding some light on it, and we'll follow up with you as this develops.
Sure, sounds good. Thanks, you guys.